My daughter, we sent her to a public school, and she got many doses of transgender indoctrination all through her middle school. And that's when a seed was planted that she could possibly change sex. My daughter was, I believe, 11 or 12 when she got her sexuality course. And I assumed that it was the same type of sex ed course that I had gone through. She and all of her friends decided that they were something on the LGBTQ alphabet, because it's certainly not cool in these days to be a straight white girl.
But what they're not being told, and what's not clearly communicated in any way, shape, or form, is if you begin this process and this journey, this will permanently medicalize you for the rest of your life.
What they are believing is that they are born wrong.
Yes.
And that's something to really understand, that these kids have acute distress because they are now believing that they came out of the womb wrong. Everything is wrong about them.
Social transition is not a minor process. It's the beginning of all of this. And we reinforce moving into the next stage when we agree and go along with their preferred so-called pronoun usage.
They are not their authentic selves unless they transition, unless they medicalize, unless they get a scalpel removing their body parts. And that's
right.
A really hateful thing to tell a child.
The best gift my parents gave to me during all of those years is not giving me what I wanted. By loving me well and not treating me badly, but then also not giving me what I wanted, that they knew was ultimately not going to lead to thriving in life for me, they gave me a profound gift of really loving me well, loving me with truth, loving me biblically. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Whether you're tuning in through a connection with Love and Truth Network or through Transforming Congregations, we're really excited that you're here. And I am happy to introduce you to someone who I consider to be a recent friend and somebody who is in the battle for many of the things that we care deeply about and are passionate about as well. But no one that I know is really in the battle quite the same way or as passionate about particular issues when it comes to transgenderism and transing our youth, basically. And I'm excited to have Erin here to kind of unpack her story a little bit. Now, one of the things that you're used to as our audience is that you hear people share their testimony of coming to faith at the beginning of our program. And Erin actually doesn't claim faith particularly. And so we're not going to be sharing, she's not going to be sharing a story of redemption and that kind of thing, but she's going to be sharing a powerful story of her experience with how she even got involved in these issues around sexuality, around transgenderism, and what kind of drew her into that, and what she's about right now in this kind of activist role that she's been in. And so we're going to turn that over to you, Erin, just to share your story, whether it's 15, 20 minutes or whatever you want to share with regard to unpacking how you first got involved in these issues.
Okay, great. So as Garry said, my name is Erin Friday, and I grew up in Catholic school. Most of my youth was spent in Catholic schools. So I'm very familiar with the Christian religion and Catholicism. But here's what happened. My daughter, we sent her to a public school, and she got many doses of transgender indoctrination all through her middle school. And that's when a seed was planted that she could possibly change sex, which is just untrue. It's not biologically possible. There is man and woman. That's it. Nothing in between, nothing more, nothing less. And we are made to perfection. And every child is made to perfection. But unbeknownst to me, the public school was teaching all of this garbage to all of the students, and they were doing this through the sex ed curriculum. And they would bring in a third-party teacher and give a good hour lesson on all these different identities that you can glum into. You can choose anything. You can choose demi-boy, pansexual, polyamorous, all these terms that really seventh graders should not even know. My daughter was, I believe, 11 or 12 when she got her dose of her sexuality course. And I assumed that it was the same type of sex ed course that I had gone through,
Right.
Eons ago, which was really PG, just the birds and the bees.
Right.
And she and all of her friends decided that they were something on the LGBTQ alphabet, because it's certainly not cool in these days to be a straight white girl. You're not unique. In fact, you're an oppressor. And these girls going through puberty and, individualizing, don't want to be labeled as hateful, bigoted, horrible humans. And so they can switch into something on the LGBTQ alphabet, and no one can question them because they know themselves. So the saying goes. So all of her friends picked something. And then as she went through a distressful time in her life, which was COVID, isolation, loneliness, living online, living in a virtual reality, never leaving her room, masked, having an avatar as herself. So disengaging with her human embodiment, she then claimed that she was now transgender. And this is, not uncommon for these girls to bounce from pansexual, non-binary, lesbian, and then land on trans. And once they land on trans, that seems to really stick because they go on the internet and they take a trans test. Anyone could Google, am I trans? I passed with flying colors. I'm super trans.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I mean, just because you ask the question, you're trans.
Right.
A female who likes to do male things, or
Right.
is trans. So that's me. I like.
It's like trying to figure out our identity from a fortune cookie or something, right? I mean,
it's as clear as that. But we're talking about 13, 14-year-old kids.
Yes.
And of course, this becomes real. And once they glom onto that trans identity, then they are lauded. They are superstars. They are untouchable. They become specials. So the nerdy kid, the quirky kid, the unpopular kid, this is a really easy way to catapult themselves into stardom. They get celebrated at school. They have coming out days, rainbows. Teachers are kinder to them. Teachers let my daughters, turn in things late and wouldn't dox her points. She could miss exams, and it was, the poor little trans kid. And then, of course, her school changed her name and pronouns to align with her new chosen name and her chosen identity without involving mom and dad in any type of.
Yeah. So you were completely in the dark on all of this at one point, right?
Correct. I knew there was something going on with my child because she was getting severely depressed, because this is what happens when these children take on a trans identity. What they are believing is that they are born wrong.
Yes.
And that's something to really understand, that these kids have acute distress because they are now believing that they came out of the womb wrong. Everything is wrong about them. From their head to their toes. And again, this is puberty, where you're, looking in the mirror and you think everyone sees that pimple on your forehead and nobody's paying attention to it.
Yeah.
So these kids, their self-esteem just plummets. And then what else happens is they go online and they're told that their parents are not going to accept their trans identity, that their parents are bigots, are hateful, don't love them, that they can jump into a chosen family, a glitter family, a family that's more accepting. So now you're telling a child that they're born wrong and that their parents don't love them.
Yeah.
And that really spins, of course, these kids' mental health out, which happened to my daughter. She was barely getting out of bed, cut her hair, wearing big baggy clothes. Everything turned dark in her room, literally dark.
Yes.
I know your listeners are very religious, and I do believe that it was demonic. Her entire room, she started to paint black.
Yes.
Sinking deeper and deeper into severe depression. Look, if you wake up in a room that's all black, you can't wake up feeling positive. And that's what she started to do. And this was, all through the internet, friends, I use that term loosely. They all joined together. They one up each other, these young girls, in how trans they can be, how depressed they can be. There's actually like a hierarchy among teenagers now on how much mental health issues they have. So ADHD is on the lowest rung. If you have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, you're higher. If you have a DID disorder of, what is it called? Basically our
a dissociative identity disorder, like literally, yes.
Yes.
More severe forms of disassociation.
Right. Which we used to call multiple personality disorder, which was pretty much debunked. Tics, they all are glumming on for more mental health issues because, again, they can jump into the oppressed category instead of the oppressor. And it's actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once these kids start saying that they are mentally unwell, then they become mentally unwell.
Sure. So it fits into the whole intersectionality perspective as well, right? The more points essentially that you have with regard to intersectionality, and mental health is just one of those. It could be race, it could be a number of things, whether you're gay versus straight, and the more, as you said, the more oppression points you have in this intersectionality graph or chart, the more oppressed you are deemed to be, and therefore in need of greater celebration, greater support, greater coddling in a sense. And so, there's definitely a motivation that I've seen anecdotally, a motivation for kids in particular, adults too, but for kids in particular to kind of just line up more and more of these points. And as you said, it's self-fulfilling. If achieving more and more intersectionality points or more and more oppression points is what seems to garner, more teacher attention, more attention in general, why wouldn't a child who's going through a difficult time in puberty anyway, why wouldn't they move in that direction?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And remember, these girls, it's not just girls, but it's boys too. They want to be thought of as kind.
Sure.
They want to be thought of as loving and accepting and inclusive. And that's how they do this. And all those words have been warped. Like I really hate the word safe and kind inclusion anymore, because it now means something totally different.
That's right.
And what is kind and loving is looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm perfect, even with my imperfections. We all look in the mirror and wish we were taller, skinnier, younger, whatever it is. But we're telling kids that they are imperfect, that they are not their authentic selves unless they transition, unless they medicalize, unless they get a scalpel removing their body parts. And that's a really hateful thing to tell a child. It's not
the thing that's left out there, and you mentioned the word medicalized, and that's so true, but what they're not being told and what's not clearly communicated in any way, shape, or form is, if you begin this process and this journey, this will permanently medicalize you for the rest of your life. In some fashion or another, if you go through surgery, if you get on cross-sex hormones, if you begin this process, it is a never-ending process that you will be on in some form or another for the rest of your life.
And here's how it works. I'm so glad you brought that up, because here's how it works. So you take step one. Step one is to socially transition.
Yes.
And that is changing your name, cutting your hair, wearing different clothes, sitting a different way. I mean, these girls, it's almost comical. Like, it would be funny. The girls would come over and they'd try to sit with their legs apart and try to burp, like taking on these, so-called masculine traits. And it's comedy. If it weren't medicalized.
So Travis, yes. So devastating, right?
Yeah. Because really, we go back to our teenage years and we were all trying on different identities. And that's normal developmental stages that we should accept. But the problem is once they concretize that social transition, once they believe that they are actually the other sex, it's not enough, because they are promised that if they transition, that all the pain that they feel, all the distress, all the discomfort, all the depression, all of the not being the cool kid will all dissipate. It will all disappear, and they're going to feel amazing.
Yep. And before you go on to that second point, Erin, it's so critical, and I'm so glad you're laying these out. But in that first process of so-called transition, of social transition, what many people do not understand and recognize, and I didn't in the very beginning either, but when we agree and we capitulate on the preferred pronouns, we are actually, so loving and well-meaning people are ignorantly going along with and beginning the medicalization process, because a social transition is the beginning of a medicalization process in this situation. And we are actually saying something that we know is not true. And so one of the things you said earlier as well is the idea of, being kind and being nice and all these other words. There's nothing kind or nice or loving about telling people things that are actually not true. So genuine love, biblical love, has to be rooted, whether it's biblical or it's just love, it really has to be rooted in what is absolutely true, first and foremost. But I think it's really important. I want the listeners, our audience here, to really recognize and wrestle with the reality that social transition is not a minor process. It's the beginning of all of this, and we reinforce moving into the next stage when we agree and go along with their preferred so-called pronoun usage. Correct?
You are absolutely correct. I tell all parents, you need to hold the line with the name and the pronouns. Now, if your child is severely depressed, like mine was, where she wasn't brushing her teeth, getting up to shower, wasn't eating, you might have to play some games, but don't give in to the name and pronouns, because you're concretizing this delusion, and it's unkind. It's actually, I think it's child abuse to do it. You can use nicknames. I know teachers who use last names. That way it's standard across the board. You can actually have lots of conversations without throwing a pronoun in. Because, when you think about it, would you ever, I would tell this to my daughter when her friends would come over and they'd have a trans identity. I would call them their legal name and I would use their sex pronouns, and my daughter would get upset with me. And I said, I promised I would never abuse a child. This is abusing a child. I will never do it. And so we think we're being accepting. We're not. And also, from a legal standpoint, sorry, I'm a lawyer, but I really strongly believe in my First Amendment rights. And I'm not going to let somebody control my language, which is untruthful, because that's the beginning of the end of democracy in the United States, is when we give up our First Amendment rights. First Amendment is the First Amendment for a reason. That's how important it is. We need to really push back on somebody telling you have to say something. You don't, and you shouldn't. And it's not unkind. It's kinder the other way. Parents need to be the off-ramp for their kids, because no one else is going to save their child except the parent.
Well, and just to underscore this first, again, in scare quotes, transition process of social transition. Just to underscore what you just said a moment ago, Erin, I look back and I'm so grateful that my parents loved me well through my confusion, identity confusion, and all of that. They never threw me out of the house. They didn't treat me badly. They met a couple of my boyfriends at different times, and it was hard for them coming from a really deep religious background to even do that. But they were gracious to these guys as well. But the thing that I knew in my heart, I mean, it was so hard for them to do that. I knew that as well. But in my heart, I knew, as much as I wanted my parents to lean my direction, to open up to the idea that this was my identity and this is who I was, and it just felt so true, et cetera, that I'm so grateful. And I often say the best gift my parents gave to me during all of those years is not giving me what I wanted. And by loving me well and not treating me badly, but then also not giving me what I wanted, that they knew was ultimately not going to lead to thriving in life for me, they gave me a profound gift of really loving me well, loving me with truth, loving me biblically. And so, again, this whole issue of social transition, it's so critical, I think, that we hold the line, because where will kids come back to as older kids or as adults? Who are they going to return to who never lied to them in this process, but was also gentle and gracious and loving throughout it as well? They need people to come back to. And if we all capitulate, where do they turn to when they realize they've made a mistake?
Right. It makes it more difficult for them once they realize that they can't actually change sex, when they've already made their parents give in. And there's actually a study out there I believe it's through the AAP, where 95% of all children who are socially transitioned then go on to medicalize. So it's just the step one. There is no getting off the train. Once you're on the train and you're socially transitioned, and the train is taking off and it's moving on, because again, social transition, it's not enough for these kids, because it's not the magic elixir that makes these kids comfortable in their skin. They have to move on, and they move on then to drugs. And exactly what you said, every single medical intervention, from puberty blockers to surgeries, are forever, perpetual. Mm-hmm. They result in the child or adult, because I don't ever want to forget the adults here.
That's right.
Being perpetual medical patients. That's a chain that never gets broken.
Does anyone benefit from that, Erin? I'm being facetious. Question. Yeah, I know. I'm just like, does anyone benefit from that? Well, yeah, obviously the pharma companies and medical industry certainly benefits from having permanent, lifelong medicalized people in their ranks. So anyway, but move on.
Yes,
I digress.
Look, we can always look at the woes of society, and we can always say the why. It's always the same two things: money and sex.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
It's always the same two things. Here, the money is unbelievable. I think I just pulled up a stat: $6.5 billion by 2030 in surgeries alone. And, people out there, you probably don't know this, but we're all benefiting. If you own mutual funds, you're probably investing in this barbaric procedures. And this is just surgeries. That's just the surgeries. That's not the hormones or the puberty blockers. Puberty blockers inserted into a child can cost upwards to $220,000. Cha-ching, cha-ching.
Yes.
In 2007, we had one pediatric gender clinic in the whole of the United States. Now we have, something like over 250. Why? Because it is a profit center. Yes. Huge profit center. So we're making money off of children's bodies. So when we go back again to kindness, and this is something for, maybe people with older listeners who are trans identified, one of the methods that I tell the parents with older kids is to actually kind of detangle it for the older kids and understand, like, they're trying to They're trying to say they're progressive. Well, look at who's making the money. I guarantee you at the top of the food chain, it's going to be those white males that they're pretending that they're fighting against. Just like Purdue Pharma, took advantage of people's pain. It's the same idea.
Yeah. 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 That's something, as you were talking earlier, I think one of the things that angers me the most is the way, and this is across many kind of mountains of culture. But the way that safety and protection is being spouted as, all we care about. I mean, we care about you, and we care about your safety. We care about your protection. And it's all this, positive, emotional kind of reinforcement, but it's like smoke and mirrors. It's like if it weren't so tragic, it would be like a fun house at a local fair, and you go in and all the mirrors are distorted, and they distort our own image, and that's fun to kind of experience. But this whole thing of the smoke and mirrors of safety and protection and really caring about you greatly, and in the end, no, all these outcomes have devastating impacts on so many lives. Maybe not on every life, but there are devastating impacts on so many lives. And people like Chloe Cole, we both know her, and many others, and they're kicked to the curb the second they start to wonder if maybe they made the right decision, and they're no longer treated in the celebratory manner, and detransitioners are mocked and ridiculed and devalued. And so there's all of that going on as well. But I interrupted you multiple times, Erin, as you're sharing. The first process of so-called transition is the social transition, and we have to watch that we're not inadvertently agreeing with that and reinforcing that in the lives of kids or adults. The second process is chemical transition, which would include puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and then of course there is the third, which is surgical transition. Did I get those about right? And do you want to unpack any one of those anymore?
Well, I don't know how much your listeners know, but puberty blockers were touted as reversible, harmless, just a pause button. That was, I listened to so many speakers say, it's just like your clicker on your TV. You're just putting the show on pause.
Unbelievable.
That's not what happens. Puberty is a time of development of the human body where all systems are reacting together in conjunction with each other and building the body to be a human body that is capable of critical thinking and reproducing and growth and physical strength. And that all gets just turned upside down.
Yeah.
So you have children who are put on puberty blockers that have osteoporosis. So they have brittle bones at the ripe age of 20. They have teeth cracking, jaws cracking, can barely walk. These are, and then you have brain developmental issues. Now, brain development, they don't even know. They don't even know what it does to the brain. There are some small studies that show that IQ can drop up to 9 points. That's significant, and you don't get it back.
Yeah.
So you're actually stunting these kids' growth. And puberty, by the way, is a cure for gender dysphoria for the younger kids. It actually cures them. 88% of all kids, if they go through puberty, they will come out comfortable in their natal sex. So you're actually preventing a cure for distressed children. And then once you put puberty blockers into a young male and go on to cross-sex hormones, well, he's sterilized. And that could be at the age of 12, where, of course, the 12-year-old isn't thinking for a second that he wants to have children because he's a child himself.
That's right.
Doesn't understand what sexual pleasure is, and all of that is taken from him. Doesn't understand about what's going to happen with his height, and that there's no take backs.
Right.
There's no reversal. There's no we can hit another button and you can go through puberty again. That time has passed. So then once they go on puberty blockers, 99% of them go onto cross-sex hormones. So again, you're on that bullet train You can't get off now. No one ever gets off. It's the Hotel California. You
Right.
can never leave. You're there. And then they go on cross-sex hormones, and, we can watch in real time some of these so-called success stories. You can look at Jazz Jennings.
Yes. So
for
terrible.
example, the parents made millions off of transitioning their young boy. And you know why they transitioned him? Because at 2 and 3, he liked pink.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. He liked pink and fairies and dolls. And I have to say, so did my son.
Mm-hmm.
He loved the princesses from Disney. He's a stray kid.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a developmental stage. My son also thought he was a pirate for a year. He wasn't a pirate. Like, these are developmental stages that are actually really normal for kids. And when you pathologize normal behavior, then you're in trouble. So Jazz Jennings now dropped out of college, morbidly obese.
Yes.
No partner in life. Is this a success? It's a success for his parents, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
They raked in a lot of money. But is it a success for this little boy who just happened to like pink?
Well,
Big
and
deal.
can you explain a little bit, Erin? So one of the conditions we know, which is a mental health issue, and where moms, usually moms, sometimes dads, will engage in what's called Munchausen by proxy, which is the basically medicalizing a child, causing a child to have problems when they're a healthy child, but the parent has a mental disorder and lives off of and craves the attention they get by their child being ill. And I know there's another similar condition that's being considered where people, I don't, whether it's Jazz's parents or what have you, it does seem like there are many parents now who are, as I watch, moms that are wanting their children to dress in drag at early ages, and they're in the back room with men, grown men who are cross-dressing and involved in who knows what, and you're bringing your child into that mess to dance on stage in front your 9-year-old or your 10-year-old to dance on stage in such a lewd and unbelievably sexualized environment. That is so abusive to children. But it seems like the parents who are doing that kind of thing are getting some kind of a rush, a kickback, something that seems to feed their desire to use their child more and more in these ways. Do you have thoughts about that particular issue?
I do, because, I track all this stuff. There's 3 sets of parents, if I could. There's parents like me who hold the line,
mm-hmm.
right, and teach love, acceptance, reality. And some of us get our kids out of the trans cult, which I was one of the lucky ones because my daughter was young.
I want to hear more about that. Yes, yeah. But that's so important.
But, parents who are holding the line. And then there are the parents who give in because they are terrified. And they're not getting any support from the medical community, their schools, even their priests. This is why I don't say I'm a Catholic anymore, because our Catholic priest told me that my daughter would commit suicide. So you don't have any help. And so, it takes a very strong parent to hold the line, because you are hated and you are alone, and it is very, very difficult. So you have parents who give in because, they believe that the medical community knows better than they do. And they want to keep their kid alive. They believe the suicide stat. So you have a lot of parents, like Chloe Cole's parents, fell for the line, and I don't, I don't blame them.
Right.
I got it relentlessly. Your daughter's going to kill herself. Your daughter's going to kill herself. And then you have we call them transhausen.
Yes, right.
Parents who, and it's usually look, I'm going to make some generalizations here. James Lindsay calls them awful, affluent, white, feminist liberals, something like that. No, affluent, white, liberal feminists. But there are these moms that are doing it to gain stardom, to gain accolades. And again, I think it's code switching. It's getting out of being the oppressor for them as parents to being an oppressed, or, getting great pats on the back. We live in a society now, sadly, where people think that their self-worth is based on how many views they got, how many likes they got,
right?
How popular they are on TikTok or Instagram. Like, there's a disconnect here in reality of what really matters. And so now these moms can post out there, look at my, beautiful trans child. Aren't I great? And they get cheered.
Absolutely.
There's a woman who she's transitioning 4 of her children. That's absurd.
There you go.
And child abuse. Proudly doing this. So yes, there's a mental disorder across the board in the United States and maybe in the world. Now we are suffering from immense mental health disorders. And I certainly blame social media for the vast majority of it, because, we've become a society where image, looks, likes, clicks is your sense of self-worth. And so these parents are using their kids as proxies to, catapult themselves into stardom. And these poor kids, like I watched a video of a child. I mean, it brings me to tears. A 12-year-old boy who was being used to fundraise for called Trans Families out of San Diego. And he said in his video, and his video, by the way, is directed at parents to teach parents. And he said, my parents have sometimes I actually do feel like a boy, but my parents have spent so much money on dresses and have invested so much money in this that I know that I'm just being transphobic, that I'm just maybe a little anxious. That's a little boy crying for help. To get him out of the dresses, to get him out of the puberty blockers, because his parents are pushing them and he doesn't want to disappoint them.
Yep. Right.
Horrifying.
It is horrifying. It is horrifying. There's no doubt about it. Erin, you mentioned your priest having this advice, and I just want to pause for a moment and just mention that. So I know, and you probably do too. I know I have a number of Catholic friends. I'm not Catholic, but I have a number of Catholic friends who have a genuinely devout relationship with the Lord. And frankly, I think there are priests, just like there are pastors, some priests I know who are amazing in their faith and deeply love the Lord and deeply love the people that they're serving and caring for. And they have an understanding of, obviously theological truth, but also natural law. I mean, and, basic understanding of science. And they're not telling parents the kind of garbage that you heard. But there's also within the Protestant world, the non-Catholic world, you've got a whole range of everything from solid orthodoxy and sound wisdom to all this chaotic and crazy progressive nonsense that, you're masquerading around as a church. And yet you don't even believe the basic tenets of scripture. And so there's, I just want to point, that out. And also the fact that whether it's this issue of transgenderism or other issues of sexuality, as it's spelled out in the scriptures, or when it comes to sexual abuse, for example, I mentioned that in past episodes that my sister-in-law is married to my brother, who's a pastor, and she grew up in a pastor's home, and her father, who is a pastor at the time, sexually abused her over and over again from the time she was 10 until she was 18 years of age, and finally got out of their home. And today, the reason I even mentioned that, no one even knew that except my brother for years and years after they were married. But when her father reoffended when he was much older, she just assumed she had been the only victim. So many churches have been historically pretty ignorant about the issue of sexual abuse in the church. And it's so easy for us as non-Catholics to point the finger when it comes to abuse scandals at the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Catholic Church is so centralized as one denomination worldwide. And when something goes awry, it sort of has all eyes on it when it explodes. But within the Protestant world, having multiple thousands different denominations, it's more decentralized, and just you don't hear as much about it. There's been news that's happened over the years, more recent years, about like the Southern Baptist, some of those churches with regard to sexual abuse and that kind of thing. But my point in saying that is not to completely depart from our conversation, but just that within the church, you have genuine Christ followers and genuine people who are in this calling because they've been called by God to do this. And you have many others who are well-meaning and then just, believe or say some pretty dumb things. And others, I think, that are actually wolf in sheep's clothing, who have no business, and people need to really pay attention to the fact that, these people actually are posing as pastors and Christian leaders and priests who are actually speaking things that are counter to what the scriptures would teach across a wide range of things. So anyway, I just felt compelled to blurt that little disclaimer out.
Yeah, of course. And look, priests are men, right? And so
Right.
They are fallible. We are all fallible.
That's right.
But it was a severe disappointment, and
Yes.
I continued to be disappointed because there are pastors and priests who know what's going on, and they are staying silent.
Yes.
And we actually really need them to speak up and be leaders in the movement to save our kids, and not to be afraid. This is, these are children. These are the most innocent in their congregation, and they have a strong voice and a strong platform, and they should be using it now.
It's true. I agree.
Be in front of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we can make strides and we can work together, I think that where a lot of Christians get off track is thinking that, I don't want to be involved in politics, or this is only about politics, and we want to be about the kingdom of God and winning souls and all. But it's not. From my perspective, it's not an either or; it's a both and. And there's a way. Like, I've been around some Christians. My wife and I have gone to to speak at a couple of state houses when different bills were coming forward. And actually, I just saw you recently at one of those situations, Erin, where we were both testifying. But we've been at some of those situations, and sometimes the Christians that are there representing truth are in the case where you and I just recently met, this was not the case, but I've been at a couple of events where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't even want to stand with the Christians because they're spewing junk. They're saying things that are ignorant and stupid. And they're not representing Christ well. But that's not the majority. That is the minority, certainly within the church from my experience. But I think that so many times Christians do get confused. And then also sometimes we use confusion as a way of getting out of an uncomfortable situation. The truth is we have to take stands on things that the Bible says are right and are righteous, regardless of it, whether it's in the public square, whether it's in our own churches. Obviously, what goes on in our churches should be influencing our life throughout the totality of our lives, in the public square, in the political arena, which of course the political arena is all about policy. Do we want policy in our country that lends itself to the best human thriving, or do we want to stand by and do nothing and allow all kinds of craziness to pass that is ultimately going to jeopardize the lives of men and women, but certainly the lives of children as well? And I think as Christians, it's right that we get called out on not taking a stand on issues that are so basic in their obvious right and wrong perspective. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that, Erin, for sure. But I would love, so comment on that if you have anything else to say there. But I would also love to hear more about what you did in the life of your daughter, and even in first confronting the school and just some of those circumstances. But what did you do ultimately that kind of work together toward your daughter's well-being?
Well, I did a lot of things to try to get her out of, and I call it a gender cult because that's what it is. It is a cult. She was told to, disengage from her parents, to run away, to call me by my first name. These are all very cult-like processes. find a new parent, find a new home, leave the people who love her the most. I did some really hard things. I took her phone away. I took the internet away. I took her on vacations to like national parks where there's beauty in nature. Again, reconnect with what is real, what is good, and learn the strength of your human body. Like how amazing it is to hike and get to the top of the mountain and then look down at the cavern, spend the night looking at, it was a new moon night, and see all the amazing stars in the sky. And this is what beauty is, and this is what life is, and it's not a screen. So we did a lot of that. I sent her to visit family, and I was very lucky in that my family is very secure, and they, of course, would not accept that she was a boy, and they treated her just as they always treated her. So she couldn't put on the facade of, because it's an act and it's tiresome for them. So it's almost a relief for these kids then to be themselves again, because they're putting on a costume. So we did that. I pulled her, of course, from the public school. I sent her to a Catholic school, which was better than the public school, but not great. I blocked those bad influences from her. So she had a group of friends that were all trans identified or, going down the wrong path. And they were no longer allowed in our house. And I did this very kind of strategically. If one of them wanted to do something with her, I would suddenly have tickets, to the aquarium. Like, oh no, we were actually going to the aquarium this day. There was a lot of that kind of behavior. And I would, tee up things on my computer so that when she would walk by, she would see them. Like I would lay these breadcrumbs out. So there's a fellow by the name of Menno who does these great videos. They're catchy and kids are just attracted to them. I put kids' books around the house that were about loving your body. I would pretend that I was hiding something, knowing that she'd sneak into my room. And
you were creative, yes.
There were a lot of things. I don't know what pushed her. I had her watch, TV shows that talked about social contagions, or podcasts, listen to podcasts about social contagions. And then I would drop at the end of a bunch of them saying, oh, some people think trans is a social contagion. So very kind of dropping little crumbs that she would pick up. And so she could use her critical brain and come to the conclusion herself without me saying, hey, look at this medical study, because that doesn't work with these kids. You have to kind of let them come to the conclusion that this is all about monetizing their bodies and that nobody cares about them. You brought up something that I think is really important. When my daughter came out as trans at her school and they changed her name and pronoun, they said they needed to be the safe space, despite the fact that my daughter was right down the hall from me because it was COVID. They'd never met her, right? They're safe. The lunacy, they're safe. Like, just think about that for 1 second. And then when I pulled her from the school, I asked her, I said, hey, did any of those safe teachers, did they call you? See how you're doing? Did anybody email you? Nobody gave you their cell phone number? They cared so much about you and they didn't contact you? So it's all a lie. They don't care. They didn't drive her around at 4:00 in the morning when she's having a panic attack. They didn't hold her when she was crying. They didn't spoon feed her when she wouldn't eat. This is the parents who love them. So we did a lot of that, and it took a good year and a half of steps forward, steps back, before she returned to herself. And it's been 2 years. since she has accepted her female body. And, every week there's changes in her. She returns more to herself. Her room is all now painted white. um, so it's a long road, and she's only 17. But she's going to continue to grow and learn how amazing it is to be a woman.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I love, especially, I mean, the whole thing. I love that you didn't just try a couple little things, but the little things really kind of fill in all the places of the big experiences, like traveling. And I often do encourage parents, and this may not have nothing to do with, just in terms of reconnecting with your child, and when you've recognized, oh my gosh, like I've been so wrapped up in my work or my career, what in the world is going on? How have I let all this fall apart? And a child or children are in a place of kind of defensive detachment, like they don't even want to be around you as a parent now, and those kinds of things can happen, and then it's really difficult to come back from that. But I think parents have to figure out, like, how can I need to be in boot camp basically for the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever. And it's never, I mean, I'm going to continue to be their parent, but I need to actually make this the priority rather than my career. I need to make my children and my child the priority. And whatever it is, if there's whatever I can possibly humanly do to break the stranglehold that this ideology, through the influence of others, has gotten a hold of my child and warped their sense of completely warped their ability to think critically, completely warped their ability to allow any contrary view to speak into their minds or give them another thought. I need to do whatever I can to break those chains and to give them the best opportunity possible to breathe clean air and to begin to understand, oh my gosh, where have I been living for this length of time? And so I think it's really important that parents are willing to not think that, oh, this is going to be a week-long thing, or I can just put them in counseling. I think counseling is very important. When you get the right counselor, you get a bad counselor, it's worse than anything. But if you get the right counselor, that's great. But that doesn't change the fact that you as the parent need to reform attachment and give them the opportunity to start thinking clearly again.
You just brought up some major points. And if I can just dovetail, thank you for that. So here's the thing: the parents make the most mistakes with. They think if they send their child to a therapist, even a non-affirming therapist, for an hour a week, that therapist is going to wave a magic wand and help their child. No, the problem actually started at home. Okay. And even if you were the greatest parent, like, something happened, and whether you were aware of it or not aware of it, but something caused your child to be distressed. And I'm not saying it's the parent's fault, but something happened. So the home has to change it. And if I could recommend 2 really important books for parents, there's one, it's called I'll Hold On to Your Kids. And it's an old book. And just read the second half. It's a really dense book. You'll never get through it.
Okay.
But the second half of the book talks about how to connect with your child again, because parents have lost their parenting. We've lost it to the phone, the internet, and to teachers. And we need to reclaim our rightful spot. And especially here in California, look, it's really hard to make ends meet without 2 parents working here. So you have very little time to really spend with your children, quality time, and hold on to your kids gives you very easy ways to reconnect with your child. Simple things like walking into their room when you're waking them up for school. Instead of doing hey, it's time to get up for school, go a little early, sit on their bed, stroke your child, fluff their hair, hug them, and say, okay, honey, you've got about 10 minutes to wake up. Like, this is you're connecting with your child in a very simple way. Instead of walking into the room and first thing you say is, oh my God, your room is a mess. Spend a little time with them. And that's the that's the Hold On to Your Kids book. Really, I found helpful with the connecting. Slow down, spend the time. It's worth it. And then there's a book called Detrans, Detox, and Desist. I might have those 3 words in the wrong order, but it's available on Amazon, and it's by Maria Keffler. And it helps to give you words to use with your child, open-ended questions. You cannot lecture your child out of this. You cannot science your child out of this. You have to love them out of this. And it's parents who get the kid back to looking in the mirror and loving what they see.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I remember reading Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. And I recall that in that book, she mentioned she didn't say this as a cure-all, but she mentioned that some parents literally were willing to pack up and move from one state, from one end of the side of the coast to the other, from east to west or vice versa, to get their child out of the environment that they were basically drowning in. And here's the point of me bringing that up. I love the fact that parents, when they woke up and saw what was going on, they were willing to do anything to give their child the best chance. There is no guarantee. It's not a promise that, if you pack up and you move from here to there, that's going to solve it. Well, it doesn't solve everything. That's a promise. It doesn't solve everything. But taking a step like that, when you've taken other steps and it still seems like something still has a hold. So you talk about the demonic and what, some of the circles that I would run in where you see that darkness settling in and people wanting to put on, only wearing black, and they're wearing black makeup and they're kind of going into this kind of goth dress, and everything is black around. I mean, that's the spirit of death. I mean, it's this thing that is coming after and coming for them, and is surrounding them and even kind of feeding them. And what winds up happening is, in this social group, they're feeding off of the dysfunction of one another in a way that really solidifies and bonds an attachment that is so profoundly unhealthy, but really hard to break unless you're willing to go to those lengths. I also love, Erin, that you pointed out that you took the phone away, internet was off. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some parents are like, "Oh my gosh, how could I ever? What can I do?" They don't even think about going to those lengths to try to dislodge and decouple their child from the influences that are feeding them on the internet. And I think absolutely we have to do that. And actually, more importantly, for parents that happen to be listening to this and they're young parents, or they're ones who want to, maybe they're single and they aren't parents yet. Don't give your kids all of these stinking devices. Stop letting them be babysat by a smartphone and the television and all of that. We need to get away from the use of those things. Can be useful when they are monitored well, but we absolutely have to stop giving our kids these devices and letting them just run amok with them. It is ruining their lives in so many ways. So that's just a basic thing that parents need to start recognizing they need to not do for the sake of their children.
Yeah, I mean, you're competing against millions, right? You're competing against a mob of millions. And by the way, that millions, they always say, go for it. You be you. You do you. They cheer these kids on because they don't care about the child. It's hard enough to parent, and then you're parenting against a bunch of strangers who don't have your kid's best interest. I know it's hard. I mean, my daughter has her phone now, but it's really hard to take it away. But I mean, what's the end all? The end all is that your child has no future. What would you do to safeguard your child's future? I tell parents to take that college fund, burn through it. Burn through it if you have to. Your child can go to college later and can take out loans, and President Biden will wipe them off. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, I just had to throw that out there.
Yeah, and actually that college fund, honestly, stop assuming your kid needs to go to college. I mean, don't assume that the only right decision is for them to go to college. Maybe, I mean, trade schools are coming back again. And honestly, trade schools, other options, entrepreneurial options that don't involve college, there are certain things you have to go to college for. But man, colleges are ruining kids in unbelievable across the board. There are certain colleges, a handful that would be worthwhile going to, but they aren't many. And so I think you just have to, as moms and dads, again, get more creative on making sure that our children get as much as possible, get from childhood into adulthood in the healthiest, most holistic, healthy way possible to move into that adult space. And there's a big role that we play in that as moms and dads, but I often say too, as dads in particular, because so often dads are checked out, moms are engaged, like they're on it and they recognize what's going on. That's not true of every mom, but it's typically generalizing, it's more true of moms and dads. And so often we need dads to step up and really take on their role and mandate of fathering to be a part of this process and the part of rescuing the lives of their sons and daughters.
I want to just comment on that, and then I'm going to have to go. But
yep.
The dads, I get it, toxic masculinity and all that garbage.
Mm-hmm.
But the dads really hold a key to safeguarding their kids. Dads used to be the protectors.
Yes.
Dads need to be involved both with their daughters and sons and not leave it just to the mothers.
Yep.
There's a yin and a yang. There's a reason why it takes two to create a family.
Yep.
And they need to be right front and center because there's always a good cop and a bad cop.
Right. So, Erin, how can people follow you? I know you have to scoot. How can people you're doing a lot of work trying to get initiatives on the ballot in California, really important ones for the sake of children. What do you want to say quickly about that and how people can follow you or support what you're doing?
Sure. So Protect Kids California is a ballot initiative to stop all gender transitions of children, get boys out of girls' sports bathrooms, and stop schools from secretly socially transitioning their kids. It's a California initiative, but anybody in the nation can donate, and I encourage them to do so. And that's at protectkidsca.com. And everyone should donate because if we kill gender in California, we end it in the United States. So we are the end and the beginning. We are the root of all evil here in my state. So please donate. And also, so you can go to that website. If you're a Californian, download the petition. It takes 30 seconds, fill it out, mail it in for 68 cents. I think that's what a stamp is now. Mail it in and you can change history back to be biological reality. To find me, I am a co-lead of Our Duty, ourduty.group. You can go to that website and contact me through there. We have a lot of one-pagers of information. So if you don't know how to talk about gender, it's right there. You don't have ideas of what you can do. But for right now, protectkidsca.com is my focus. We need to collect our signatures by the end of May. I need everybody donating. I need everybody talking about it, tweet about it. Find me on Twitter,
Yep. Great. Well, listen, I just want to encourage our listeners, our viewers to donate to this very important and worthy cause. And Erin, it's so great to have you here with us. Thank you for joining us. And for those that are tuning in through Love and Truth Network or Transforming Congregations, we are grateful that you were here. Hope that you received some really helpful information from this conversation with Erin. And again, Erin, thanks for being with us. We so appreciate the time you've just invested with us in our Transforming Congregations podcast. To join us for future podcasts, dial into transformingcongregations.org/podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.